Right, bonjour, welcome, hello, welcome to the Philosophy Club here in the middle of France, La Creuse. And it's a little weekly thing we do to combat the rise of Sophiaphobia, the forces of ignorance that are afraid of wisdom. So this is my little Voltairean attempt to focus down on what is really, really important on the planet. And it's not a formal academic philosophy seminar or anything. It's much more using the term philosophy in the way that the 18th century intellectuals used it in France. Les philosophes. It's a way of asking deep questions and reflections on what's happening in our world as we cruise around on this planet through space. Is this the best way we can run the world? Is this the most intelligent to compile stockpiles of nuclear weapons that could destruct the world in our lifetimes? Spending all that money and resources on that instead of feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, looking after the children that are being turned into orphans. You know, I think I'm a dissident. I coordinate Philosophers of Peace here in Europe, and I'm vice president internationally. And I believe philosophers, by which I mean deep, genuine intellectuals, have a duty morally to speak up about the current state of the world. And as Rabbi Hillel said, if not now, when? And if not us, who? And Zamenhof, who founded Esperanto, a great Jewish savant from Poland, he quoted Rabbi Hillel. He said, this is a universal ethic that can reconcile Jews, Christians, every other faith. And that's why he launched Esperanto. So, you know, I don't know how to speak Esperanto, but I'm trying to develop a vocabulary of Esperanto for the heart and for the mind, so that we no longer speak words of war, hatred, and venom to each other, but words of peace and truth above all. So that's really an introduction, that's why we're here, and it's a pleasure to be here in France, which is like a haven of intellectuals throughout history. Many great intellectuals have taken refuge here from all cultures. And I'm writing a book, it's my homage to France, which I will finish before I die, of all the people who are not French by birth, but who've ended up living here through extraordinary circumstances. And I've got a whole list of them. One of them is Gurdjieff, of course, the great refugee from the Bolsheviks. And there have been many great intellectuals who've ended up here. And so, you know, I thought I'd and it's my way of saying thank you to the French people who've allowed intellectuals to come and live here. Okay, so that's the introduction. Let's do a little rundown of what I've been up to in my work as a philosopher this week. This is my report back to the club. Well, I've been involved with this project in Ireland, run by my friend Dr. Sean English and his dear wife Marianne, to reactivate the teachings of an Irish saint called Saint Adomnan, who was the abbot of Iona, which is a little island off the coast of Scotland, near where my castle was, where I lived for 7 years. St. Columba founded this abbey in Iona, and it's a beautiful place. It's one of the holiest places in the British Isles. He was Irish, but it was in Scotland. But at that time, you see, the word Scotia meant Irish. Oh. So Scotland actually means the people of Ireland who came to live there. And Adomnan was one, and he had this idea, which he wrote into law, the Lex Innocentium in Latin, which is the law of the innocents. And he proposed to his Irish brethren, who were fighting pretty ruthlessly, you know, they were Celtic warrior chieftains, and they were not making any distinction between competence and non-competence, between women and children and the battle force. And he said, look, that's not on, let's have a new law, the Lex Innocentium, the law of the innocents, so that we won't attack and kill the women and children and the non-combatants. And he wrote it, he got it passed by a council in Birr, B-I-R-R, in the middle of Ireland, in about the 800s in Christian calendar. And incredibly, it was agreed by all these warring chieftains. And it was the first such law that we know of in European history, the Lex Innocentium, and it held good. Now, what we're saying, this group of Irish friends and me, is that it's time to revive this, because we have wars now going on the planet where innocents are being slaughtered, as in Gaza, as in Ukraine, as in many of the modern wars fought in my lifetime. Obviously, Hiroshima and Nagasaki were an example. The distinction between the the laws of war and the non-slaughter of non-combatants, I think, needs reaffirming. In spite of modern weapons. I mean, drones, you think they're sophisticated, but actually they're blowing up wedding parties in Pakistan and Afghanistan and killing people that have nothing to do with anything. So what we're doing, we're calling for a reactivation of this, the Lex Innocentium for the 21st century. There's a public launch of this. It's a document online, which they've written. It's available in Gaelic and Latin and other languages and English. And we'd love to have it translated into Japanese and Chinese. And we want people to sign it, that if, we will not engage in war and violence that is harmful to non-combatants. They've extended the idea of the innocence to include nature. So you're not allowed to poison wells, burn forests, destroy natural resources. Interesting enough, this was in the original ideas of Muhammad. The jihad had very strict laws. You weren't allowed to attack nature, and you certainly weren't allowed to attack non-combatants. So in some ways, this idea of the Lex Innocentium, it was around about the time of Muhammad, the same time period. So, I'd like to organise a conference of learned Islamic theologians and legal jurists discussing with Christians and with other faiths about this law of the innocents. So I've been involved with that. We had a meeting, and it's being launched on the 21st of September, which is International Peace Day. And it's a good time of year. It's when the UN's General Assembly starts meeting each year, and I listen to the speeches. So if anyone is in Ireland, it will be near Birr, and you can go and attend, and you will sign the treaty in the original, vellum page or whatever. I also attended a meeting of the Scientific and Medical Network, which is another group I'm involved with. These are people that want to combine science and medicine and spirituality. So we're combating this idea of scientism, that if you can't measure and weigh and itemize it in a material sense, then it doesn't exist and there's no point studying it. What we're saying is that no, modern science has gone beyond that 19th century idea. There are sophisticated, subtle forces, there are energy vibrations, there are waves, there are studies on consciousness that show that the heart is conscious, has a neuronal network, feelings are real, and the mind is much more complex than people realise. It's more intelligent, actually. So, anyway, we had a meeting of the New Paradigm Navigators, they're called, which is the youth group. I just sort of sat in because I went to their conference recently, and there were some great minds there. Young people in their 20s and 30s just doing PhDs and stuff, who are doing research into this, what is consciousness, etc. So that was fascinating. And and then I attended a conference run from Africa on Wednesday, the African Peace Studies webinar, which I go to most weeks, run by George Mutalemwa in Tanzania, who's a very learned chap. He runs the Catholic Universities Network of Africa, and he's a professor of sociology and development studies in the University of Tanzania. And this one was interesting. It was about 30 of us online, and we were asked to do a little biographical thing. What's our life story? Just a 20-minute thing. So I had to boil down my entire life story of studying as a peace scholar into 20 minutes. And I decided, I got this brainwave, to do it in terms of an homage to all the great libraries I've visited over my lifetime. Because I'm a passionate scholar, I love libraries. My idea of a brilliant holiday is to spend it in a brilliant library. So I rehearsed all these libraries, things like the British Library, the London Library, the University of London Library, the University of Calgary Library, which meant a lot to me in the day, my parents' library, which is what got me interested in, philosophy, the National Library of Wales, the Muslim College Library where I taught, and so on. Even the Moscow library of the Lenin Library, it's called, in Moscow, the Columbia University Library, the Hebrew University of Jerusalem Library, and the National Library of India, etc., etc. So I did a little 20-minute survey of my life in libraries, and that seemed to go down well. Also in Oxford University Library, which I spent a lot of time teaching and studying. And then finally I finished with the Vatican Library, which I have a reader's ticket to, and that's another great library, if you ever get a chance. And I finished with the Heavenly Library, which is the idea that the great King of England, Alfred of Wessex, the only great king, he's called Alfred the Great, he asked his Welsh bishop, a Christian, "Dear bishop, you say there's a heaven I'm going to when I die. Will there be a library there? Because I'm always very busy as a king. I don't have time to study and read everything. Not enough hours in the day. I'm too busy doing courts and justice and founding cities." And the chap wrote back, Asa, and said, "Oh, king, I'm sure if there isn't a library in heaven, when you get there, they'll make one for you." So I take that as my cue. There is a heavenly library. I have it on Asa's advice. And so that's the one I ended up with. That's where I'm from, actually. I'm just visiting this place. And I've discovered this is a common feature of the Islamic world. They believe in the people of the book. What's not to love? The Heavenly Library. The Taoists believe in the sacred texts from the gods, the Shinto. So, everyone actually, we have readers' tickets to the Heavenly Library, but we have to earn it, have to re-earn it. If you burn books, that's a no-no. If you burn people, that's a real no-no. So you have to behave to get into the Heavenly Library. Anyway, I did that. That was fun. And meanwhile, King Charles III, who I met, was opening Parliament, and there was a King's Speech going on in Westminster, where I ran 30 meetings for the House of Lords. And really, the Labour Party, thank God, was promising all kinds of good stuff. I really support their new government, and I hope they can deliver on them. One of them is to recognise the Palestinian state, independence of the Palestinian state. British are responsible for a part of this mess, because we allowed, the Zionist movement, we gave it support in World War I, and we wrote the Balfour Declaration saying you can have a state, without really thinking through the consequences. Even though we put a line in there saying, as long as it doesn't harm the locals. But of course, we didn't realise that, A, the Holocaust was coming and the Jews were going to really be pretty aggressive, and that we also didn't realise that some of these really extremist Jews would do alliances with the hard right in Europe, and the Irgun, and these Jewish terrorist groups after World War II started attacking the British, who promised them a state. Why? This is just crazy. But they were very impatient and infused with a sort of nationalist, racist ideology. And Netanyahu comes from that stable of, actually not really religious at all. For them, Judaism is a matter of ethnicity and national identity. And anyway, so I'm struggling with all this and been working, but I'm delighted David Lammy has just gone to Israel and Palestine. He's the new Foreign Secretary, and I will be communicating with him because as chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East, I want to see them pull this off. But we have to stop the killing that's going on. There are children dying every few minutes in Gaza as we speak. This is unbelievable. I've read reports of how horrendous their injuries are. And, I used to work in hospitals. This is not acceptable. I know what that's terrible. So, anyway, Charles opened Parliament. Let's get on with the work, is what I would say. And then it's been fun to welcome new guests and visitors here to the museum. And I'm working still on the 99 Names of Peace, as people have been told or know. I've been working this week on some American Indian languages, Navajo and Cherokee, but also African language, Luganda, which is the language of Uganda, and it's a Bantu language. So I've been studying, its word formations and all that fascinating stuff. And then the Olympics are opening next week. I've been indirectly kind of involved a bit in that. because I've been the educational coordinator of the Delphic Games for the last 3 years, which is the parallel to the Olympic Games, which was for sports people. In the ancient Greek world, they had the Delphic Games, which was for artists, poets, musicians, dancers, theatre. And they would meet under the auspices of Apollo and Delphi and have contests. And you didn't get any prizes, you got a laurel wreath. And we've rebirthed that. I'm working with Dr. Christian Kirsch of Berlin, who was the founder of this thing. And that's ongoing work. Okay, I'll stop there on that front. And any questions, comments about this week? Anything anyone wants to share about what you've been up to? You've all come from different parts of the world. Okay, and then, so what we'll do then, we'll move on, and we'll do, so what I want you to do is put your finger on the table and choose, or if you've already chosen one, go with the one you've chosen.
No, I couldn't
Right.
have
Or do it with your eyes shut and just point the finger on. Okay.
yes.
What did you get, madam?
Jainism,
Yeah.
Digambara.
Okay, that's a good one. So I'm going to make a note of this, and then I'm going to summarise what they all mean at the end. Okay, that's the Digambara one. Thank you. Right, Heidi, what have you got?
Esoteric Freemasonry,
Okay, what number's that?
117 C.
Mine is, I don't spell it,
Right.
88K.
So there's like, is it 116 you're going for, or 11?
117.
You want 117? Okay. Right. Okay, Kitty, what one are you having?
Philosophy, postmodernism.
What number's that?
How do we say? 142B.
Okay. Right, excellent.
Islam,
Islam.
Sufism, 83G.
Okay. Right. And Armel.
Christian pacifist,
Ah,
141.
okay. Yes. 141, right, excellent. Okay, so, gosh. What I like to think of with these traditions is that they're all interconnected. And they all interfuse and have, received inspiration from each other. And if somebody wants to fund this, cost a couple of million, I want to create a planetarium, like they have in London at Baker Street, planetarium. I don't know if anyone's been to a planetarium. You sit in a comfortable chair and look back on the backrest, and you gaze up at this huge oval ceiling, or circular ceiling, and then it lights up with the star formations. And then they move the stars around at different times of the day or night, and they can zoom in on a particular constellation. And there's a voiceover commentary that talks about, this is Taurus, and these are the Pleiades, and this is what they actually look like. And so it's like you get an hour and a half or 2 hours of just as if you're going on a trip around the universe, as if that wonderful American thing with your favourite American author from the 70s, the scientific tour of the universe. What was it called?
Oh, Cosmos with Carl Sagan.
That's the one, Cosmos with Carl Sagan. That's a kind of television version, but the planetarium is brilliant. Now what I want to make is a planetarium with all these 168 traditions programmed in, and they'd be around the base of the dome. So you'd see the numbers around there. And then they would shoot lines across, connecting up, say, 88 to 42. And then the voiceover commentary would explain, well, 42, that's a really, ancient thing. That's like ancient Samaritan Judaism. It's the oldest form. They used the original alphabet before the later Jewish peoples And then they'd connect to another one and explain the interrelations between them, right? And then you could take three at once. So you could explore different branches of philosophy, how they interrelate and stuff. So I think that'd be a brilliant, like a planetarium guide, as a basis for intellectual peace building. Because the point, some of these things, if you shoot the lines between, say, the Hindus and Muslims, they fought terrible wars, often. Or you shoot it between Muslims and Jews. Now there are wars going on, but for a lot of history there weren't. The Jews and Muslims were best friends. They got on really well, like in Spain. And this could all be in the commentary, right? Anyway, we don't have this room set up for that yet, I apologise. So I have to do my best. I want you to think of that planetarium, right? So the first one, number 88, is the Jains, and that's a good one to start with. I've been to India many times and met Jains. They believe in non-violence. Ahimsa is the heart of all spiritual teaching. If somebody is a prophet or a teacher and they're advocating violence in their cause, it's not the very deepest of teachings. Only non-violence is. And they influenced Gandhi with his idea of ahimsa. And they've influenced me a lot. I've met Jains, and this is the oldest form of Jains, Digambara. They're quite strict, and they don't allow clothes. They don't allow their followers and teachers to wear clothes because they're just an encumbrance. They think you should be free in nature. And of course they live in South India where it's very hot. And if it's too hot, you sit under a tree. And they just come as they are, you know. Like we're all born naked. We die naked, we're buried naked normally. So like why not live in that proximity to reality? And other groups do the same. It's interesting, the Wiccans, which are number 23, Wiccans or witches in Europe also used to like to get naked and dance around the bonfires with no clothes on. Because, again, same idea as the Jains, it's the most natural thing to do. And the Digambaras, one interesting thing about them and the Jains, is we know that the founder of the skeptical school of philosophy, which is number... where is it? We had it a couple of weeks ago. Where's skepticism? Can't remember the number. Anyway, it's there. I think, somewhere. So, the founder of skepticism was a man called, it's in the Humanist one, number 75. Yeah, it's in 75. He was a chap called Pyrrho of Elis, and he's a historical figure who went with Alexander the Great to India. And the reports, accounts all say that he met with gymnosophists. And a gymnosophist is a naked philosopher. And that's the word for Jains. It can't be Buddhists because Buddhists don't go naked. Pyrrho met with Jains and he brought back their teaching, which he called skepticism. And the teaching of the Jains, which is very interesting, is that we cannot know the absolute truth about everything. The human mind can't know it, certainly not all, simultaneously. Even the greatest computer couldn't manage to know everything always. So we have to suspend judgment and focus on what's really important, like ending the war in Gaza, like stopping the war in Ukraine, like feeding people that are dying and having to eat, Let's prioritise what we can do and not worry about, whether X or Y or Z. And the trouble is the internet is full of sort of idle speculation, if you want, and we're not focusing enough on what's really, really important. And so Pyrrho of Elis launched this idea of skepticism, and the term he used is a technical term, epoche, in Greek thought, which means suspending judgment. And this was revived in different times in European history. Here in France, by people like Montaigne, who were skeptics. They were Christians, they were Catholics, but they were skeptics. They said, yeah, I'm a Catholic because I was brought up, I enjoy it, I like the art and the music, but I can't swear absolutely that it's the only or the best truth. It's my truth, I'm happy to work with it, but I respect and admire the other truths. So there was a rebirth of skepticism. And in a sense, that was the triumph of the Jain tradition, suspension of judgment. And then Husserl, who launched phenomenology, that was all premised on this idea of epoche. So that's how the Jains have lived on, in a sense. It's interesting. So thanks for that one.
Thank you.
Let's move on to the next one, 117, Esoteric Freemasonry. Number 117. Do you want to say something about that, Heidi? What's your interest in that? Have you been to a Masonic museum at all or anything?
No, it's just that I just picked the number in my head and I
That's what it was.
and I ¿cómo se dice? Aterricé ahí.
Okay.
But I've always found this a very confusing part of because there is a lot of information, a lot of speculation and
Nowadays.
conspiracy. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, on the
But,
internet and stuff,
I went to some attempts. I've met some people that claim to have this knowledge, but I've never studied.
Never studied. Okay.
No.
Well, thank you for that. So it's an interesting tradition, and I got interested in Freemasonry. Historically, I was living in London. I was asking why, what's the secret of Britain? I discovered Freemasonry was very important in the 1800s. It was then exported by British Freemasons to Europe, to France, and the scientific revolution was partly inspired by them. People like Newton, Locke, the kind of rationalists were a lot of Freemasons, actually. And then I researched further. I discovered Sir Francis Bacon, who was the founder of empirical philosophy in Britain, is rumoured also to have been one of the founders of non-operative Freemasonry. So the idea was that the metaphor is that it's like a lodge is a brotherhood of men and or women now in France who are looking for wisdom. And we're all collaborating and we all bring our bit and we do a ritual which is like a prayer, an invocation. You invoke the four directions, you invoke the guardian angels, and then you initiate people into the lodge, and then they have to take certain oaths, like of veracity, truthfulness, honour, honourable behaviour. You can't be initiated as a Freemason and do criminality and stuff. And it's a sort of moral teaching that you get. And they use this idea of the rebuilding the Temple of Solomon. And you go through 3 degrees for the initiatory ceremonies. And in the last one, you enact the ritual killing of Hiram Abif, who was the architect of the Temple of Solomon. And he was slain, it is said, because he wouldn't divulge the secrets of the Masons. He was Phoenician. So you have to lie down in a coffin, but then you're reborn. And having done that, it's all very solemn at night, you get buried in the coffin, and then you rise, and that becomes a symbolic rebirth. So it's a sort of reenactment of the ancient mysteries, which in the form of Egypt, like Osiris and Isis, were mysteries of death and resurrection. In the Christian mysteries, likewise, it's a mystery of death and resurrection. And what Freemasons say is that they're reenacting the original mysteries, which the other religions have sort of pinched from, going back to the root. So I've researched all this, studied the history, met scholars who've studied it. And when I was doing my history degree, I realised this is really important. Like, who's written about this? And nobody, really. So I went away and spent time in the libraries in London, where there are Masonic libraries and stuff. I researched that. And I discovered that the right wing, the fascists, hate Freemasons, and have done for the last 200 years. Hitler persecuted them wherever he could find them. He killed them, put them in camps. He came to France and killed them all. Mussolini hated them. He abolished them in Italy, fascist leader. And Franco did the same in Spain. He killed them all. And in fact, he hated them so much, he wrote a little book against them, saying they're the devil's crowd. Salazar, I don't think, was too fond of them either in Portugal. But then, if you actually go into it, as I did, they were incredibly progressive and intelligent people who helped birth science and chemistry and economics. And there was a thing called the Lodge of the Nine Sisters in Paris, where some of the greatest intellectuals of the 18th century lived. I discovered the founders of the American Republic were Freemasons. Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin. I mean, these people aren't devil worshippers who should be crushed, in my opinion. And so I was trying to look at it objectively and say, well, you know, this is good what they've done, and then this is a few dodgy characters got involved. And then I discovered, so the question I asked, I wrote a book on it, is what was the link between Freemasonry and socialism? Because you'd expect this metaphor of building, it comes up in socialist rhetoric, you know, we're building the new state, we're building the promised land kind of idea. There's some evidence that Lenin might have been initiated into a Freemasonic lodge in Paris. We certainly know that Moses Hess was, who introduced Marx and Engels to each other. Right, like quite important. Moses Hess was a Jewish Hegelian philosopher and a Freemason in Paris. And we know that quite a lot of these early socialist types were Freemasons, but they were on the left wing of Freemasonry. We know that Salvador Allende in Latin America was a Freemason and a socialist. So I researched the left story of Freemasonry, sort of against the right wing who were attacking them all, saying, no, actually, maybe they've done some good stuff here. And I published this book, and I asked the question, were Marx and Engels ever actually joining the Freemasonic lodges? And it's probably no, but what I argued in the book is that their thought would not have been possible without a couple of centuries of Freemasonic ideas like economics, you know. So that was all very interesting. Now, you've chosen, the Freemasonry has complexities within it, as they all do. There's the European type called the Grand Orient, which is the French-based. And if you become a Freemason in France, chances are you'll join the Grand Orient. That's very popular in Latin America and Italy. Most Masonic lodges in Brazil and Latin America, Mexico, will be Grand Orient lodges. And you don't have to affirm the belief in a supreme being anymore. You could be a secular thinker, just want to believe in human brotherhood and well-being and socialism or progress. Whereas the Box 117 have kept the oath to the supreme being or God. You can't join the Masonic lodges without swearing an oath that you believe in the supreme being, the God, the great architect, as he's called. And I've studied the differences, and on the whole, it's the Anglo world that follow 117, the box you've chosen. They've kept the idea of God. On the whole, Europeans, more secular ones, go with 116, and the Latin Americans do the same. They've also, in the more secular lodges, 116, initiated women. And we do know, and I've discovered and can prove, that Napoleon was initiated in the Grand Orient traditions. And a lot of women were in the Napoleonic Empire, a lot of his marshals, which is never written about by historians. I mean, historians are, I don't know what's the matter with them. They all just are like not looking at the bigger picture. Whereas, for instance, Wellington, who defeated Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo, they were both Freemasons, but one was the Grand Orient Grand Master Freemason, that's Napoleon, and the other guy was the great architect of the universe, Wellington. So it was an inter-Masonic war. And Nelson, who defeated Napoleon in Egypt, was also a Freemason